All right, so we need to kind of get ourselves in perspective to see who we are, because we're too arrogant. We think that we are advanced. We're not advanced. And there's civilizations that have been and still are more advanced than us, in the sense of us, meaning us who are thinking we're in the modern epic and advanced, being advanced. Now, the thing about the book that I mentioned, The Message of the Engraved Stones of I.N.K, if you type it into your search engine, you will get a website of one brother that put a lot of images up. You won't get the book, of course, but you'll get some images. And inside of these images, what you will find out is that these Amaru people, corresponding with the Mayan calendar that they were already here, depicted themselves interfacing with these Jurassic prototypical animals, Jurassic meaning dinosaurs. I have in the book that I'm looking at right now 27 glyphs etched into a stone that is called andesite, used to depict these particular things. All right. The other part of this discussion that is important is not only do they depict Jurassic animals, and Jurassic animals would have lived, according to modern data, 213 million years ago. They're the only ones on the planet that depict these particular things in carvings and etched glyph work that is not Paleolithic in the sense of made by people who are not necessarily at the level of intelligence that we are. No, these are glyphs that are very clear, that you can see, and they are beautiful pieces of artwork that, according to modern standards, would be 213 million years old. Find me somebody on the earth that has that. You won't find it. Not only that, you say, well, maybe they're false. Maybe the stones and the etchings are false that are in this particular book that I'm mentioning, The Message of the Engraved Stones of I.N.K. Well, that was purported. So the author, who actually was a part of the discovery of the stones, and there are almost 20,000 of these stones that were found in I.N.K, Peru, sent them to be tested. All right? And when he sent them to be tested, the author, of course, here is Dr. Javier Cabrera Darquilla. He took 33 of the stones, and he took them. He had a friend that was called Louis Hachal of the Mauricio Hachal Mining Company based in Lima, Peru. So he sent them to the laboratory to get them to be tested, and they were tested by a geologist by the name of Eric Wolf. And he basically made a statement that's a part of this book. I want to read it. He basically said, this is unquestionably natural stone shaped by fluvial transport. Petrologically, I would classify them as andesites. Andesites are rocks whose components have been subjected mechanically to great pressure, which causes chemical changes to take place. In this case, the effects of the intense esterification are obvious. This process has increased the compactness and specific weight. And he confirms that he would send them to the University of Bonn in West Germany. And he basically states that the rocks are from the Mesozoic era, which would align with the third era or the second era of the Mesozoic era, the Jurassic era, 213 million years ago. All right, so now we have the rocks being tested. Now, andesite is a stone that develops from volcanic rock. And on the scale, on the mole scale, which is a scale that's used to test the hardness of rocks, the rocks come up harder than granite, which means that in order to make the carvings into the stones and the etchings, which are actually pieces of art, right, artwork that are very detailed and actually very beautiful in the way that they look. They're not, caveman type of carvings. They're very artistic. The archaeological report says that the people would have to have carbon steel, diamond cutting materials, or possibly even lasers. Now, who do you know 213 million years ago, when there was supposed to be no human beings, could be using that type of technology? So right here in the Americas, you had that going on. According to even the modern data, at least 213,000 years ago during the Jurassic era. And not only that, they made depictions of how they physically looked. I'm holding a book right now, and on the front page you have one of the stones that depicts one of the chiefs with full garb on with a telescope looking up into the stars, and the stars are etched onto the top of this particular stele. Who had telescopes this far or this far back in history? There's no depictions of anybody with telescopes. So our question remains, what type of advanced civilizations existed millions and millions and millions of years ago right here when we don't find this type of information anywhere else in the world? Not only did they leave this particular type of information, but they left maps that show the tectonic plates before certain levels of cataclysm occurred on the planet. Now, many of us learn about civilizations that we call Atlantis and Lemuria and other things, and there have been proposed ways of how they look. These particular people left these particular maps, and they showed the continents when they were connected, when the plates were slid together. All right? So we have, according to the research that we've done, we know that there were certain levels of cataclysms that caused the tectonic plates to slide. That information is verified, but this is prior to those cataclysms that mostly would have happened 12,900 years ago, around 10,000 BC. They gave us maps that old. No one else has maps prior to that particular period. So, again, we're dealing with evidence, very, very clear evidence of very ancient material. All right? So now we have the oldest calendar. Then we have the oldest glyph writing. The oldest glyph writing today is found in I.N.K, Peru on these particular stones, which make depictions of the constellations. It identifies them. It makes depictions of what the people look like. It gave depictions of the animals living during that particular time, over 17 different types of so-called prehistoric animals, which were cross-checked with the fossil record to verify that these depictions on the stones match those particular animals. So we have to ask ourselves the question, brothers and sisters. If all this information is coming up, and we had so-called esoteric teachers like Prophet Noble Drew Ali and others who came and taught us parts of this information, is it erroneous or is it false? Since we know for a fact that this particular information exists and has been tested, and you can't even get this book in the United States, the signature line spells conspiracy. And the conspiracy states and denotes that there's somebody who does not want you to understand global history as it was recounted by these particular Aboriginals. And it's not by coincidence that our ancestors were able to further calculate using their calendric systems and having the knowledge of earth sciences and having other levels of knowledge that are far more advanced than we could ever imagine. It's not by coincidence they were able to predict the rise and fall of the very civilization that we are a part of into a calendar that we call the Mayan calendar, which is really a Moorish calendar, or a calendar of the Amaru, or the Ashia, the Asiatics. These particular things cannot be argued. We are seeing the earth go through these particular things. All right? So when we are talking about verifying this information, we have it. The next level of verification that I want to go to are the actual cities that were found. I'm going to give you some more books. In the late 1800s and the early 1900s, I see somebody's hand up. I'm going to come to you in a minute. I want to just get this last a little bit of archaeology information, then we can kind of get into some other information. William Nivens, who wrote a few books, studied in the Valley of Mexico, and in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, he wrote several materials documenting cities that go back to the Pleistocene era. Now, I'm not talking about stone carvings and little flints and stone. I'm talking about cities